Alright, so we're back once again, and today, for a little bit of a change, we're going to be discussing some of the ships that I have in my port that I think are some of the most fun and best ships to play in the game. We're going to be ranging from destroyers to cruisers to battleships, but not carriers, because, well, I don't play carriers and I don't find them fun. So, with that being said, we will be bouncing around different classes quite a bit, but generally we're not going to stray too far from higher tiers, mostly because that's the tier I enjoy playing the most, and well, it's very difficult to find an exceptional ship the lower in tiers you go. Although there is some obvious exceptions to this that we will touch on in the video. But with that being said, let's jump right into it, and of course, as always, if you're enjoying the content, consider subscribing. So first up is the Thunder, of course, one of my favourite battleships to play in the game. Now this was going to be a toss-up between the Thunder and the Conqueror, but of course the Thunder is basically just an upgraded version of the Conqueror, so in a discussion between which ship to put on the list, the Thunder was the only real winner here. The Thunder sports 457mm guns, which is quite a step up from the Conqueror's 419mm guns, but that isn't the main attraction of this ship, it's the accuracy. This ship is one of the most accurate BBs in the entire game, and when you contrast this with the Conquerors, although you do lose one gun per turret, it really doesn't matter, and it really doesn't make all that much of a difference. Because the guns in the Thunder are if you literally could cage lightning and direct it onto the enemy ships at will. And that's just the AP. The HE is just as potent as the Conquerors, which is good and bad. Bad in the sense that certain players can play the ship, get high damage and think that they played well, all while never switching to AP during the entirety of the game. The good is the fact that the HE can just be really effectively used to deal with those bow-in tanky ships that seem impossible to move when they get into position. Things like the Kremlin, for example. Now you may be thinking, this is a great ship, I should probably buy it. But there are downsides. The Thunder is not the Kremlin, it is not the Groza Kurfürst. It's just not that tanky, especially if you're up against HE spammers. So if you see 15 Smolensks, 10 Worcesters and 5 Conquerors on the enemy team, you're about to have a really bad time for the next 20 minutes. And of course that's hyperbole for anyone thinking that, you know, if you can get 30 ships in a team. On to the next ship. Daring. The second of the Royal Navy ships to be featured in this list, but probably the strongest also. This ship is the very definition of versatile in World of Warships. It has 6 smokes, which are incredibly versatile whether you want to use them in the usual way to do damage, or even if you want to dodge the 15 carrier strikes per game. These smokes are so incredibly useful, as they're really short duration and have a really good reload, so they're pretty much perfect from every situation possible. Except for the case if you want to sit and smoke for 2 minutes farming damage. Then they don't work all that well, but in that case I'd advise you to go play USDDs. Alongside this, the Daring also has incredible DPM. When you step up from the Jutland to the Daring, it's going to feel like you're going from a 19th century cannon to a 21st century naval gun. Yes, the DPM is that insane, and you really will feel the difference. Now, of course, like most ships, there is going to be a downside, and the downside comes with the fact that it's not all that fast at 36.8 knots with the speed upgrade and flag, which means that if you go for that 1v1 and you end up on the losing end of the trade, then escape becomes very difficult against a lot of DDs in the game. But this is a factor in pretty much every Royal Navy DD, not just the Daring, and generally you're not going to be losing many 1v1s in the Daring. It's just that good of a knife fighting ship, although of course there is exceptions. Well, let's keep going. There's a lot more interesting ships to talk about. And now we get to the very first non-Royal Navy ship, and it's none other than the Yamato. Now you might be thinking, why didn't I pick the Shikishima, or whatever it's called? And to be frank, it's for 2 reasons. First, I don't own the Shikishima, so if I did pick it, your screen would look a lot like this right now. But the greater reason is that the Shikishima is basically just a copy-paste of the Yama with 3mm caliber, which is important in certain circumstances, especially in terms of overmatching certain armor thresholds. But overall, it's just going to mean you get more overpens than anything else. So the Yamato, what to say about the Yamato? It has the strongest guns in the games, except for the ship I just mentioned, but for the longest time this ship had the strongest guns in the game. But that's not even what makes the Yamato so good. It's the legendary mod, and the accuracy that it brings that elevates the ship to a higher level. Although you do trade off some turret traverse for the pleasure of getting that extra accuracy, with proper positioning, it really still is so worth it. It feels like you're shooting a single barrel, but there's 6 shells contained within it. It truly makes the ship one of the best in the game. Now there are downsides, mostly the fact that if you aren't accurate with the aim, then it's not going to be a good ship for you. The reload is typical for BBs, so you get about 40 shots per game maximum at base reload to deal damage. And if you're not accurate with those 40 shots, then you're not going to get very far with this ship. But with that being said, let's keep going. And now we get to the first US ship on the list, the Alaska. This ship is fantastic. I'm going to say something maybe controversial about this ship, but here goes. This ship is one of the best cruisers in the game, and probably maybe one of the best ships in the game, and it's easily the best tier 9 cruiser in the game. It's tanky as all hell, which means it's damn near impossible to citadel as a result. To add on top of this, it also has radar and a heal, and when you combine all of these things together, you get the power of this ship. What it means is that once you get into a position you can hold, it's going to take a hell of a lot of force to get you out of that position, or to push you away from that position. Generally the only real thing that can stop you, or push you out of that position, is if you lose a flank, and you get side torped. Generally everything else is going to take 4 or 5 ships to actually push you away from a position that you hold. And generally you're the ship that makes life hell for DDs. Any hope they had of capping is eradicated through the use of both the fact that, again, you're incredibly tanky, and of course if they actually try to cap, you have a radar at your disposal. We still haven't talked about the guns in this ship. The AP is incredible with really good penetration, which means that any broadsides you can see can be punished so easily. Now these shells aren't the fastest in the game, but again, when you're in that 11 kilometer to maybe 13-14 kilometer range, it's not going to matter all that much. These shells speak for themselves at that range. Alongside though is the HE, which is also extremely potent, and when you tie in the fact that the Alaska just has so much cap control with its radar, and the cherry on top, its HP pool is large too. All in all, I can't really say good enough things about this ship. Truly one of the best in the game. But let's keep going. The Warspite. And finally we get a little bit of a deviation from tier 10, and we finally get to the last ship on the list, the Warspite. The pride of the Royal Navy and the most decorated Royal Navy ship ever. And it's a lower tier ship on the list, coming in at a lowly tier 6. But let me tell you, this ship is just so much fun to play that I couldn't help but put it on the list. Now being last on the list doesn't mean that this ship is the best. That's not how my list works. But anyways, let's get into what makes this Warspite so good. The first thing I have to touch on is that it only has 8 guns, which you may think is a bit low, but what it lacks for a number of turrets, it makes up for in terms of penetration and also accuracy. If I'm not mistaken, it has a 2.0 Sigma, which is really good. I think that matches the Thunder. Now, when you add on to this that the ship does have decent secondaries, although that isn't really an important selling point, the next point I want to make is that the ship has a turning circle of 550 meters, which is incredible at this tier, which I feel compensates for the really poor turret traverse, because if you swing the ship around quickly, get your guns on target, then turret traverse can be negated to an extent, although you do risk giving broadside to whatever is focusing you. Following up this though, the ship is pretty strong in terms of armor. It's one of the tankiest battleships of the tier, and is one of the few, or even I think only ship that can actually heal citadel damage, although I'm not 100% sure about that. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I believe you can. Which, as you probably suspect, makes the Warspite an excellent brawler, also, and extremely tanky. Now of course there are downsides, and probably the most important one is the turret traverse, which is probably the factor that people have issue with the most with this ship. And to add on to that, you're playing tier 6, so when you bump into those tier 8 North Carolinas like you do in this video, it's not gonna end so well. But that's just a factor of being up tiered, and there's not really all that much you can do about that. But overall, I really enjoy playing the Warspite, and I think it's a really good ship to play, and really fun, even at lower tiers in the game. Although, maybe not so much now, if you're botting tier and trying to 1v1 in North Carolina. But, that being said, that was my list for some of the best ships in the game. Did you agree or disagree? Or what ships did you think deserved to be on my list that weren't on it? I think these lists are always difficult to come up with, especially the fact that everyone's going to have a different playstyle, so one good ship for one player won't necessarily translate to a good ship overall. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, give it a like, and if you enjoy the content, consider subscribing. But until next time, I'll see you in the next one.